Good morning, Dr. Principal Alraj. Good
Sir,
morning,
you are
sir.
unmute. Principal, sir, you have to unmute.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Dunstan, sir. Very happy to hear your voice, in this webinar.
Good morning, sir. Good
Very
morning.
good morning, sir. Very good morning.
Okay, sir, I'm going to. Sir, shall we start the meeting?
Yeah, sure.
Respected correspondent of our college, Advocate L. Rajadurai, the principal of our college, Dr. K. Palraj, faculty members of the Department of English, beloved resource person, Dr. Selvin Vedamanikyam, members of the internal quality assurance cell of our college, and members of the PG English Association, participants, good morning to one and all. Let us begin the program now. And I request the second MA participant, Ms. Shirley, to propose the formal welcome speech.
Okay, sir. Distinguished delegates, participants, and contribute. A pleasant good morning to all. It's my delight to extend the warm vision on the behalf of Nesamani Memorial Christian College, Martanda. It's my immense pleasure to deliver the welcome address in this valuable moment. First of all, I would like to invite the presence of God Almighty in this glorious occasion. Next, it's my privilege to welcome the correspondent of our college, Advocate L. Rajadurai, who administrates the college in an eminent way. On the behalf of every single person here, I welcome you, sir. I take it as a pleasure to welcome our principal, Dr. K. Palraj, who authorized the webinar to be conducted in this fine day. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
It's my honor to welcome our thoughtful, resourceful person, Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam, professor in the Department of English at St. Joseph University, Nagaland. We are fortunate to have you as a resource person here, sir. On the behalf of the dignitaries and participants, I welcome you, sir. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor T.B. Thomas, Head of Department and IQAC Coordinator, who took efforts to organize this webinar. I welcome you, sir. I also take this opportunity to welcome Mrs. Pradisha P.S., the webinar's co-convener, to this meeting on the behalf of the gathering. I welcome you, Mrs. Pradisha. It's my immense pleasure to welcome all the delegates of this college IQAC section who took steps to conduct this webinar in this fine day. I take it as a glory to welcome all the staffs and students from various universities and colleges all over India who has been here as a participants of this webinar. Welcome you all to this wonderful section. I hope this session will be useful to all. Once again, I take this opportunity to welcome one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley, for the words of welcome. I also would like to welcome Dr. Jarnail S. Anand, who is from the Punjab University, a great poet. He has written a number of books, and he was also a part of the World Poetry Conference. So I welcome you, sir. I welcome also our former resource person, Dr. Noel Hriday Raj. I welcome you, sir. I welcome Dr. Dunstan and all the dignitaries who have assembled here today. Let me now invite the principal of our college to propose to give his presidential address.
Thank you, TD sir. Most beloved and respected Secretary of our college, Advocate L. Rajathurai. Today's resource person for this webinar, Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam, Professor of English, St. Joseph University, Nagaland. IPSC Coordinator, Professor T.B. Thomas, who is the organizer for this today's webinar, also our IPSC Coordinator. Then students, members of the organizing committee, members of the IPSC of our college, faculty members, and other eminent personalities and scholars who are attending this webinar across the country. On behalf of the Nesamani Memorial Christian College, Marthandam, from the bottom of heart, I welcome you all. Dear friends, during this lockdown period, series of webinars being conducted by the IQAC, either independently or in association with the various departments of our college. Today's webinar, entitled on the trauma of surveillance, reading man and pandemic, is one of the good webinar being organized. Definitely all the participants will be enriched, will be benefited more by attending this webinar. Dear friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has created vast changes in all aspects of our life. It has made a huge impact on the social, cultural, political, and economical fields. Right from the creation itself, humans are suffering a lot to survive and overcome the obstacles in their life. At times, the struggles and hurdles make the humans to reflect the same in the form of literature. Creative writers of various nations and cultures have responded to the pandemic such as plague, Spanish flu, cholera, etc. They have witnessed and commented their experiences in their writing. We all know that tsunami, the natural disaster, has created a huge destruction in our nation, especially in our district, taking away many human lives. At that time, the creative writers reflected the effects of tsunami and the sufferings of humans in their writings. And these disasters create a permanent scar in the history. The emotional response and a close observation of human and literature is very prominent at this time. So this webinar on the trauma of surveillance, reading man and pandemic will throw light on the role of surveillance of literature during this pandemic, especially the COVID-19. Dear friends, as I mentioned earlier, today we are having a wonderful webinar by this topic, as I mentioned. I hope and I wish all of you for a good and useful day. Thank you, Anantal.
Thank you very much, dear principal, for those words of introduction and welcoming the gathering. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce today's resource person, Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam. You all know he's currently working as a professor of English in the Research Center and PG Department of English of St. Joseph University, Nagaland. And he's a great literary person, okay, who has got a very close relationship with the Dr. Christopher Norris, the British philosopher and professor emeritus, Cardiff University, UK. He has appreciated the copy editing of his book by him, and he has included his name in the acknowledgement of his book, Language, Logic, and Epistemology. Dr. Selvin has served as a member of Board of Studies in Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli, and also Bharathidasan Government College for Women, Pondicherry. He was a resource person for the refresher courses conducted by UGC HRDC several times at the University of Madras. He also has headed the training and development for corporate companies before he came into the teaching field. His PhD degree was from Bharathidasan University in English, and it is on the topic, a study of Paul de Man's rhetoric, irony to irony. So he has got rich experience, both in teaching as well as in corporate. And he was an independent consultant for publishing and entertainment industry during the previous time. He was also the director of operations of HCL Technologies, senior manager, Macmillan Publishing Solutions. He worked as manager in Integra Software Services. I was a content development manager. And before joining St. Joseph University, he worked as a lecturer in Pondicherry University Community College and also Kandasamy Kandar College. He is now a member of the Academic Council. He is also actively delivering a number of lectures during this lockdown period. He is an invited speaker in international conferences and webinars. He has also research scholars. He has got a guideship there at the university, and he's doing a lot of research activities, publishing articles in prestigious journals. And there is a lot to talk about him. His details goes to pages. So because of the shortage of time, I don't want to read all those things. He was also the resource person for Pondicherry University distance education programs and also Indira Gandhi Open University programs. He also has conducted a number of personality development training programs for employees. And regarding his educational qualifications, as I mentioned, he got his PhD in English from Bharathidasan University. His MPhil was from Pondicherry Central University. He did his BA and MA from St. John's College, Tirunelveli. And he's also a member of Board of Studies for English for the undergraduate and postgraduate. He was earlier for Bharathidasan University, Tiruchirappalli. And he was also a member of Board of Studies for the Bharathidasan Government Arts College for Women, Autonomous, Pondicherry, member of Board of International Curriculum Design, etc., etc. So it goes on. So I'm very happy to introduce such a renowned personality today to this August gathering. And today we have a wonderful session on the topic trauma and surveillance. I invite Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam to continue with the session. Over to Dr. Selvin.
Thank you, sir. Thanks to God Almighty to guide my tongue during this webinar. My sincere thanks goes to the secretary correspondent, advocate,
Of information takes place through some predefined channels.
my sincere thanks to the secretary correspondent, advocate Mr. L. Rajathurai, Dr. K. Palraj, the principal, and Dr. Tibby Thomas, the HOD, for organizing this national seminar. My best wishes and thanks to the colleagues and the PG Association of English of Nesamani Memorial Christian College. And I thank all the participants of this webinar. I would like to thank my friend, Dr. Joseph Dunstan, for always available for me. Now, today, I would like to express my gratitude to my teachers. I'm made by my teachers. I would love to share a few names here. Reverend Father Peter for teaching English in my school days, Dr. R.S. Arlanandam, Dr. Edward Sundarraj, Dr. T. Karnagaran, Dr. Sundar, Dr. David Augustine Karnagaran for teaching literature at St. John's College, Palankote, and Dr. Mardanayagam and Dr. N. Natarajan for teaching me criticism and theory. My permanent teacher, Dr. Noel Joseph Irdayaraj, who is never tired of teaching me for the past 25 years. He is my immediately available encyclopedia, and he is full of surprises every day. I know there are lots of students here today. A word to the students. It is true that we may and we should outgrow our teachers one day, but we can never should try to outsmart them. That is ingratitude and cruel. We may outgrow our teachers, but we should never outsmart them. That's my initial observation. Before going into the lecture, the core of the lecture, let me give you a few tips. First, relax. Don't be sort of very serious about this lecture. Just relax in your chairs. If you're lying down, please relax. But fasten your seat belts. We will be traveling a long distance from the ancient times to the contemporary times. There might be some turbulences, some shocks, some ups and downs. So do not forget to fasten your seatbelts. During the course of the lecture, if any incidents, characters echo or resemble your neighbor or someone in the street, in your state or in your country or anyone in the world, I'm not responsible for that. But I would appreciate that you have good creative imagination and associative sensibility. Let's go into the lecture. I'm just going to share my screen now. Dr. T.V. Thomas, my screen is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Your screen is visible. Yes.
Okay, let's move into the topic. Today's topic is the trauma of surveillance, reading man, and pandemic. What we are going to learn today. This lecture is sort of separated into three parts. The part one I'll be talking on surveillance, its lexical origins, socio-political accelerations, the utilitarian principle, and disciplinary function. Part 2, how I'm using Fuco and Agamben to read man. There are multiple ways and multiple critics and theorists and philosophers to read man. Many have done that, but today I am using Fuco and Agamben. Part 3, I'll be using certain type of theories to read the pandemic. Today I'm going to use the word surveillance and trauma. Let's take the word surveillance. It's really essential to understand the word surveillance, where it started and what is the usage trend analysis. So this is from the Collins Dictionary. I have tracked the usage of the term for the last 300 years. When it got started and when it got picked up, and is there any, I could see only peaks, there is no troughs. The first known use of the word, it started in 1800 or 1802. And Collins Dictionary mentions that in the common usage of many words, surveillance is one of the 10,000 most commonly used words. It's interesting to note that from 1950 onwards, the usage trend has seen an upward steep climb from 1950. Moving from that point, if you come to 1998, if you see the graph, from 1998 to 2008, the usage trend is on the increase. So for the last 300 years, the term surveillance, that is 1800 to 2008, it is on gradual increase. It has peaked from 1950. Let's see another trend. I have used the Google Books Ngram Viewer. Actually, Google has a powerful algorithm, an artificial intelligence, to track all the available material. Where all it is used in what sense and these things is a very, very useful tool. It's a statistical tool. Google Ngram says from 2005, the usage trend has peaked and remained there. If you see this area, that is 2005 to 2018, it has remained there. That means it has peaked out there. From 2019 onwards, there is no data not available. Maybe after 2-3 years, it might see another serious peak because of COVID-19. Let's leave the history of the word. Let's go to the etymology. It comes from the word surveyor, to watch over. In fact, that word comes from another French affixation, sur plus veiller. Sur means from above, to watch. From old French, veiller, that is to watch. End of the day, all these French roots come from the Latin vigilare, that is watchful. So the key term is watch from above, surveyor, surveillance. Now we have to understand, even Collins Dictionary and Google Ngram Viewer says 1800 or 1802 is the first known use of the word. What is the significance of the decade 1800, or what is that 1800 point? We should know why that point of time, that word sort of emerged. The reason is that was the decade after the French Revolution. It is interesting to note that the word surveillance is a product of the French Revolution. It has a socio-political tinge to it. Before going into the French Revolution, I asked a question, do we have any ancient instances of surveillance? In fact, surveillance, we can say that if there is a political kingdom or there is a king who is fighting between, kings fighting between each other, there might be surveillance. But I want to really point out two instances, one from the Bible. When Moses sent few people to explore Canaan, he asked those spies, his people, to check what the land is like, whether the people are strong or weak, how many are there, can we outnumber them, what kind of land, is it good or bad, what kind of towns, is it walled or fortified, how is the soil, is it fertile or poor, what trees are there, bring back some of the fruit of the land. So this is the first instance of the surveillance that we can see in the Bible. It is from the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 17 to 20. Moving to Egypt, the Pharaoh, Ramesses II, he wages a war with the king, Muwatallis, of the Hittite king. And the Pharaoh and the Hittite king, they actually fight tooth and nail. It is actually recorded in the history. The Roman historian records it. It is called the Battle of Kadesh. And in that battle, the Hittite king Muwatallis sends 2 spies to the Egyptian king, and the Pharaoh outsmarts those 2 spies. This is in the first instance of surveillance from Egypt. Let's move from these ancient examples to the French Revolution. Before going into the French Revolution, I would love to take a historical novel by Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. This we would have read many times in our literature classes or for leisure purposes. This novel, actually it was published in 1859, but it was set in the 1800s, that is in the decade of the French Revolution. In fact, it is set in 2 cities, one in London, another one in Paris. It may be a father and a daughter. The story, we leave that story apart. The setting is before and during the French Revolution. The decade from 1790 to 1800, that decade of French Revolution, that reign is called as the Reign of Terror. Charles Dickens captures the plight of a traveler. A traveler, he is traveling into the revolutionized France in 1792. This novel captures, Dickens writes, he captures, he sort of narrates the condition of revolutionized France. How was it? Let's see. Let's see one paragraph from Charles Dickens. It says, every town gate and village taxing house had its band of citizen patriots. Those days, France had citizen patriots. So these guys acted as surveillance bodyguards, and they were sort of associated with their own groups, and they were in an explosive state of readiness. They stopped all comers and goers, cross-questioned them, inspected their papers, looked for their names in lists of their own. That means they have a database of the entire names of the citizens. So they could find the strangers or people from other districts. And they had the power to turn them back or send them on or stop them and lay them in hold. They can arrest. They can do on-the-spot judgment. They used fancy. Charles Dickens was so, he was actually attacking openly. He calls the dawning of the Republic one and indivisible, of liberty, equality, and fraternity, or death. So this is the one paragraph that captures the spirit of surveillance inside the French Revolution in France. Another paragraph, Charles Dickens calls the surveillance. In fact, Charles Dickens never used the term surveillance. He uses a phrase, the universal watchfulness. He talks about the universal watchfulness here, and it is so poetic. See, the traveler travels inside revolutionized France, and the traveler feels his freedom is at stake, his freedom more completely gone. What does the universal watchfulness does here? It only stopped him on the highway 20 times. It retarded, it stopped his progress 20 times in a day. By riding after him and taking him back, riding before him and stopping him by anticipation, riding with him and keeping him charged. So here it's a metaphor of riding, it's almost stalking. Surveillance is stalking here by Charles Dickens. I just want to summarize whatever we have seen so far. In Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, there are 4 items we can sort of list down. One is the alertness to check everyone, ask for papers and check for details, on the spot fanciful judgment, accept, stop or arrest anyone. You should keep in mind the phrase Dickens uses, the universal watchfulness, which is synonymous with surveillance. This might, this entire description might bring you some echo, some memories of COVID-19 lockdown and other related protocols. Okay, now let's move to the socio-political accelerations of a French society. It's a little bit of history. The first French Republic was formed after the French Revolution. In 1792, the first French Republic was formed, and 1793 and 1794, it was hell broke loose. It was called the Reign of Terror. In fact, to enforce order and discipline, they created a few committees and some laws. The first one is Committee of General Security, then Committee of Public Safety, then they had Watch Committee, and they have revolutionary tribunals. So what these committees, they actually do? They can inspect, they can arrest anyone, and they can pass judgments here and there. They use their fancy instead of judgments. Let's see this law of suspects. See, this law of suspects is nothing but the entire population was asked to carry a certificate. And the certificate says, okay, he is a citizen of France, and he is not a person of bad faith or bad ideology. And there is another certificate they have to carry, that is the certificate of citizenship, that is as a proof of ideological soundness. Okay, from the first we saw Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, and then we moved to the French society. Now let's see Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian, the founder of modern utilitarianism. He's an English philosopher, jurist, and social reformer. In fact, he visits his brother Samuel Bentham in White Russia, today, the modern day Belarus. His brother was a naval architect and he was an engineer. He was working in Belarus, the modern day Belarus. And the idea was Samuel Bentham's idea that because he was managing large manufactories in Russia those days, he was actually trying to create a sort of a place from where he can monitor hundreds and hundreds of workers. So Jeremy Bentham picks up his idea and he publishes a small book called Panopticon, or the Inspection House. He in fact creates an architectural drawing which is popularly called as Panopticon. Panopticon, pan means all, opticon means you can see from everywhere. So this is the drawing you can see. It's a circular structure and all the cells are sort of linearly arranged, and from here the guards can sort of see all the prisoners or inmates or students or laborers, whoever it might be. Let us read the title of Jeremy Bentham's book, Panopticon. It says, containing the idea of a new principle, who are the persons, he says, kept under inspection. He in fact calls a list of people. One is people in penitentiary houses, prisons, houses of industry, workhouses, poorhouses, lazarettos, manufactories, hospitals, madhouses, and schools. So there is a category of people who has to be monitored. That's what Jeremy Bentham feels. I had a question in my mind, why not the legislative assemblies and the parliaments where also a lot of people gather? So this shows the social strata. It has been sort of Jeremy Bentham wants to monitor. Okay, let's see what is a Panopticon. See, Panopticon is a circular building at the hub of a larger compound, and there will be a lot of people, maybe a lot of workers, prisoners, inmates, anyone it can be. It can apply to a factory, to a prison, or anything. So Bentham talks about the economy of supervision. He says that there is no need for too many guards, too many supervisors to manage a big building. He says all that you need is a couple of supervisors to manage large number of people, because the structure is asymmetrically visible. What is that asymmetrically visible? See, the inmates, they cannot see the guards, but the guards can see the inmates. That's asymmetrically visible. And Bosovic, a critic, he says, is completely an optical imagery. So one side is illuminated, other side is dark. In fact, it creates a mental pressure. The inmates, they know they are being inspected all the time, so they have been motivated to act properly. So it actually creates a self-regulated and sort of a self-regulated behavior. That is the desired result as well. And the key term in Jeremy Bentham's idea or theory is inspection. So only he calls it as the inspection house. Panopticon, the inspection house. Inspection as a root from Latin in and specere, that means look at. Even from surveillance also, you watch, and inspection you look at. So there is something you are actually being watched always. Let's move to Michel Foucault. You know, Michel Foucault, he has written something on surveillance as a disciplinary function in his book, Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. So actually, Foucault, while he writes this book, he actually accesses an official order from the military archives of Vincennes. What is the military archive? The official order talks about the management of plague at the end of the 17th century in a town. The name of the town is not mentioned in the official order, but the official order talks about two major categories. One is strict spatial planning and inspection. Here too, you will be able to sort of echo or sort of relate with COVID lockdown. See, remember in mind, this happened in the 17th century, okay? What are those things? Few highlighted items we will discuss. The closing of the town. People cannot move from one town to another. There is a prohibition. You can't leave. And each town is sort of divided into distinct quarters, and you have an administrative official, and every street has been monitored or under surveillance. And we have been those people have been asked to stay indoors. They cannot come outside. They cannot come in the streets, and people cannot go out to buy anything. They had the rations at their doorstep. And if it is absolutely necessary, they can leave the house, but only by turn. They can't go by in groups. This is strict spatial planning. See, this is the official order from the military archives of Vincennes. The next one is that official order talks about inspection. It says the gaze is alert everywhere. Now the word is sort of changing from surveillance, inspection, monitoring, and gaze. See, the militia or the guards, they actually guard the gates of the town hall and in every quarter, and they have observation posts at every place, and each streets are guarded by sentinels. So this is a small information Foucault uses to develop his concept of discipline and punish. Actually, I'm just taking this a little further to support our today's talk on surveillance. Let's take another literary text by Albert Camus, The Plague, La Peste. It was published in 1947. Even though it was published very late in 1947, the novel talks about plagues of the town called Aurora, which is in Algiers of France. See, Oran, the town of Oran has a history of plagues. The town experienced bubonic plagues in 1556, 1678, 1921, 1931, and 1944, and cholera, the plague of cholera, 2 times in 1849 and 1940s. So the source material comes from these older events. Albert Camus develops this source material, but he situates the novel in the 1940s France. Albert Camus, because he belongs to the existential group, he talks about the powerlessness of the individual characters. And he talks about, in fact, the entire novel is on the it's a stark allegory on human condition. The story, in fact, I just wanted to point out in that novel, the two characters, Toru and Ryu, they hand over the district map to Rambert, the chief, for surveillance purposes. Albert Camus also talks about surveillance in his The Plague. So far, what we have seen, let's try to summarize. So we have seen different type of texts and what are the texts and the keywords. The first one is a historical event or text, that is the First French Republic. There, the keywords can be watch committee, Comité de Surveillance. Then the second one is literary text, that is Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities. The keyword is universal watchfulness. Then the third one is the architectural text. Here, Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. The keyword is inspection. The next literary text is Camus' The Plague, surveillance. Then Foucault's Discipline and Punish is a genealogy. The birth of the prison. Here, the keywords are inspection, gaze, and observation. See, so far I have sort of taken different types of texts, and it is actually a regimented survey of surveillance. It is not exhaustive history of surveillance, I've taken different texts to move our point further. Let's move to part 2, that is reading man. So far, you have seen some sort of types of surveillance from literary texts and different other texts. Now let's move to reading man. How to read man? There are a lot of philosophers, they have defined, they have discussed about the condition of man and other related items, but here I'm going to focus on two thinkers. One is Fuco and another one is Giorgio Agamben. Before moving into Foucault, we have to really remember few key items. Foucault coins the word governmentality, legal governmentality. There is a semantic linking of two words. Governor, that is governing, and mentality. When I say governmentality, we normally try to say that it is a abstract noun of government and governmental and governmentality. It is not that. Mentality means modes of thought. That's what Foucault tries to really link here. And he says the governing of modes of thought. That's what Foucault means by governmentality. There is another critique I really want to bring to your notice, and he says it is not possible to study the technologies of power without an analysis of the political rationality underpinning them. Lemke talks about political rationality behind these technologies of power. Let's take the example of managing pandemic. It often appears that providing and managing public health care is constitutional responsibility. That's what government claims. Government claims that it is their constitutional responsibility to protect the citizens. We common people, we know the what and how of managing the pandemic. We've been always told of the what and the how, but why? That goes under the carpet. Or the why is often decorated with medical jargons. We don't understand a lot of the why of the management of pandemic because it is filled with medical jargons to make it mythical. We don't understand it, or it has a super evasive episteme. So there is a political rationality behind it. Okay, let's move to the how the right of depth and power are sort of mixed in managing life. Foucault, in his book, The History of Sexuality, he talks about the privilege of sovereign power. Here, sovereign is you can say the ruler, and it can be a body, it can be a single person. And Foucault traces from a single person to a group of people called as governments. In Roman history, there is a concept called as patria potestas. Patria potestas. What is this patria potestas? A Roman father, he has the right to dispose the life of his children and his slaves. A Roman father means a Roman father can kill his children and his slaves. The same way, a political sovereign can demand his subjects to participate in a war. First one, the Roman father can kill his children and slaves. When you move to the political sovereign, which is the head of the state or head of the country, he demands his subjects to participate in a war with a declared enemy. The subjects who is going to participate, they're called soldiers, okay? The soldiers, they will not have any role in identifying or deciding the enemy. The political sovereign, the king or the head of the state, he will ask the subjects to go in a war with a declared enemy. What happens? The lives of the subjects are exposed indirectly to death. Okay, I am a soldier. I'm not going to participate in the war. I'm a subject and I don't like fighting. If I say that I'm not going to participate in the war, what is going to happen? I'll be put into death through legal means. Anyways, I'm going to die. If I go to war, I will die. Most probably, I will die. If I don't go, surely I will die. That's a treason and a lot of other legal complications will happen. So the sovereign, first of all, has the right to kill. That's the first right the sovereign takes over. Then protecting and everything comes secondary. According to Foucault, from the 17th century onwards, this right to death, okay, Foucault traces this very clearly and cleverly. For ages and ages, right to death was the privilege of the sovereign. From the 17th century, this privilege to kill shifts. Where does it end? The lives that can be put into death now has been shifted as capital investments. Okay, what is this capital investments? The sovereign now knows how to manipulate, exploit to its own benefit. Foucault actually categorizes the shift into two. He says both are different poles, but they are complementary. They are not opposite poles. One is anatomic, another one is biological. The anatomic pole, it actually serves the institutions and establishments. In fact, Foucault talks about how the institutions and the establishments been developed. Maybe he uses the case of educational institutions, schools, prisons, madhouses, a lot of stuff. The second one, biological. This is the most important point, the biological. Here, the lives, the human lives, maybe we call it as man, the human lives are considered as species. Maybe a group of living animals, a species under regulatory controls. So the group of people, a population, 10,000 people, 1 million people, they have to be controlled. There need to be regulatory controls, and this is called as biopolitics of population. It was Foucault who first talks about biopolitics. Let's move to the next concepts, after which the biopolitics happens. Foucault develops 2-3 points. One is biopower and capitalism. Now, please remember the lives, those can be put into death by Roman fathers and Roman sovereign, not those days sovereign. Now they've been transformed into bodies. That is the real need of capitalism, because they know they need the bodies to produce things. These bodies are put inside a machinery of production. So only we have unemployment as an index now, unemployment as an issue now. So giving employment becomes the prerogative of a constitutionary body or a government or whatever it might be. So now what happens? The lives, the relationship between the phenomena of population and economic processes. So your individual lives, your free thinking and everything, it's still there, but it's a calculated, concerted effort to put into some economic processes that will give you some wealth, some means to survive, to earn your bread. That's what they say. Biohistory. Okay, before going there, the key terms you have to remember is availability. The availability of body is very important. We need bodies. If you, maybe I worked in corporate companies, we calculate headcounts. We say how many headcounts we have. Then we change the terminology into full-time equivalents, FTEs. We have 800 FTEs, that means how many hours, how much we can produce, that sort of availability. That's number one. Second one is docility. Those bodies should be docile. Those bodies should not question. Those bodies should not resist. Those bodies should sort of adhere to whatever rules, whatever laws the corporates bring over upon them. And the methods of power, that is a different topic altogether. Okay, what is the result of this biopower and capitalism aim at? One is optimization, because economy, the economy of scale, the economy of goodness, optimization is important. Then aptitudes. Then they say, okay, we want to train you, enhance your skill set, or free training, those all to increase your aptitudes. And finally, easy to manage lives. You have to kill the questioning attitude and sort of bring the lives as bodies to produce some economical benefit. It is nothing. Now the lives, man has become another resource. For example, in a factory, cotton becomes the resource, right? The same way, in a country, bodies become the resource to generate revenue. Let's move to biohistory. In fact, biohistory is a key concept Foucault discusses. He talks about, in fact, Foucault is sort of, he is a balanced person when he talks about the biopower and capitalism. He doesn't take a negative stance, he's actually taking a positive stance. He says, Foucault accepts there are some benefits and there are some collateral harm. He sort of maintains balance there. And he says there are political technologies intervening the biological existence of man. He says biohistory should trace the history of this deliberate insertion of bodies into the biological makeup of humans. What I see, if we put this in perspective in managing pandemic, I see it is super ironical, the biopower and pandemic. See, we have, for example, it is more than 18 months we have seen this pandemic. Many of us would have forgotten small stories, small sufferings that would have reached us for the 18 months, but the rush to save lives endangers lives. But people say that, oh, we have to save lives, but a lot of lives have been killed. Now the question is, whose lives are more important? Keep that question at abeyance for some time. Let's move to Giorgio Agamben. Giorgio Agamben, in fact, he takes the biopolitics and biopower and other concepts to different extent. He uses few terms like homostasis, state of exception, form of life, and biopolitics, the term. We need to understand a little difference. I think I have talked about this in the previous lectures as well. You have to remember, in Greek, there is no single term that defines life. Aristotle talks about zoe and bios. Zoe is the biological life. Bios is the political life. Zoe is the reproducing life. Bios is the qualified life. So bios is something like the qualified life. It talks about the manner in which life is lived. Zoe is always excluded from the political life, and polis is the city-state, and Zoe is relegated to a private sphere, normally in the agrarian setup, to produce agrarian agricultural products and bodies. When I say bodies, to create, to reproduce children, to bring more bodies so that more food is produced and these things. But there will be only a handful of people inside the polis. Those polis sort of is the city-state where a lot of the government officials and nobles, those people live. Now, what has become is Zoe is a bad life. Agamben calls Zoe is a bad life, and Zoe is sort of a homo sacer. What's the homo sacer? Homo sacer in Roman law is a sacred man and an accursed man. It's a figure of Roman law. If someone, the Roman law declares someone as homo sacer, that person is banned. First of all, he is banned from the country, but he may be killed by anyone. If I am going to kill a homo sacer, I will not be liable for any prosecution. I will be not penalized under any law, but that person cannot be sacrificed in a religious ritual. What is the bottom line? A homo sacer is permanently exposed to death. Do you remember when we talk about the Patria Potestas and the sovereign, they had the right to kill, and in homo sacer also the quality as to be killed exists always. Okay, how this homo sacer and bios in fact operate? The sovereign actually operates with a state of exception. The sovereign, what the sovereign does is, he actually creates a law, and sovereign excludes itself from the law. The law stands inside the law and outside the law. There is a capacity to an exteriority. The law uses force, and the law actually sort of says it is going to protect everyone, but it is not doing so, because it actually exempts someone. Someone can really tamper the law. When I say tamper, they can amend the law. Okay. What I see is, I see an irony of a bad life. See, I am a bad life. I want to normalize, first of all. I want to come out of that bad life. So I have a desire to normalize, but I always I see a failure to neutralize that. I can never normalize. I can never neutralize my negative stuff, because there is always an economic competing. Because I am a body, I am fighting with you. There is an economic competing, because we always claim that, oh, getting some economic upliftment, I'll just be a normal. I can come out of the bad life. No, that's not happening. The economic competing makes us do a rat race and everything. And we often forget that we are always already in an excluded status. But what we say inclusive society, that is a falsified one, because I am a bad life. I am a biological life. I am a Zoe. I am not part of the political life or the bios or the qualified life. I always sort of try to climb out of the cage, try to climb out of the pit, but it's only a Sisyphean cycle. It's a complete failure always. Now towards, I think we have another 10 minutes. Let me come to reading the pandemic. How I read the pandemic, okay? So far we have seen surveillance and how to read man using Fuco and Agamben. Now, how to read the pandemic, how I'm going to use pandemic and surveillance and man, how trauma, what is the trauma, why the trauma is happening. Let's see that portion now. Before going into the trauma, these are my pointers. These are things I observed personally in the past 18 months. COVID-19, what is in the name? First, I didn't call. I've been asked to call because I don't name it. I've been asked to call. It is 2019 novel coronavirus. Most of you can remember this. Then the name suddenly changed, SARS-CoV-2, based on the SARS of 2003. SARS is severe acute respiratory syndrome. Okay, SARS-CoV-2. What is in the name? That which we call a coronavirus by any other name still would kill as poison, like Shakespeare, right? Okay, now, why I'm talking about this name, the act of naming, that's very important. There is a committee, international committee called as ICTV, International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses. This we have now the meteorological department, the Met, naming the cyclones these days. This ICTV, they name the virus because they are responsible for the taxonomy. So they name first and they rename. But I see the renaming suggests the lack of knowledge in the first place. They say every day we find new things. Yeah, good. Okay, they're trying to improve, but we have to accept that they don't know that previously. That we have to fight. Now, what happens is in doing this, they do the surveillance of the virus, not of man. Surveillance and naming and renaming. What happens is the virus gets changed every now and then. The code is getting changed and the antidote also goes useless. They say they are still in the discovery phase. They keep on discovering new viruses and new antidotes. I see it is a loss of imagination, the failure to predict and simulate. In this advanced scientific era, in military parlances, they say we have to predict and simulate. The key question here is what directs the purpose and telos of medical research? It is not the scientists who are responsible, but I would love to bring Shakespeare here. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. It is not the scientists who are failing, but someone else is directing those scientists to do certain things. Okay, now let's move to the surveillance theories. I want to quickly bring to your attention. Now, how do we classify or historically classify the surveillance theories? First one is the architectural theories by Jeremy Bentham and Michel Foucault. We have seen this. These are physical technologies watching over subjects. So these are architectural theories. Second one is infrastructural theories. These are networked theories. The key proponent is Deleuze. Deleuze talks about the distance. And Kevin D. Hackett, Richard V. Erickson, and Shoshana Zuboff. Shoshana Zuboff's 1998 book is very, very famous. They talk about networked intelligence. Here, there is no need to be sort of physically monitoring because the increased distance, it involves data. You can do a infrastructural surveillance. The recent one is the data valence theories. Now you see a new word has been coined, data valence. Valence is watch, right? Data valence theories. Now you're talking about access control, social sorting, Facebook and Twitter. Anything can be sort of monitored and you can be put under surveillance and peer-to-peer surveillance and resistance surveillance. So these are surveillance theories. Now let's move to the trauma theory. See, the trauma exponent is Kathy Karuth. She has written a book. She has written 3-4 books. The main one I want to really talk about is the unclaimed experience, trauma, narrative, and history. See, trauma is a Greek word, and it comes from Greek, and even in Greek, it has the same spelling, trauma. Initially, trauma meant just wound, but it underwent a semantic evolution from a mere wound to philosophical, socio-political, psychological, to a complex Freudian term. From a physical wound, it actually sort of evolved to a complex psychological Freudian term. Let's see this Kathy Karuth's quote. She says, the breach in the mind's experience of time, self, and the world. She talks about time, self, and the world. And she says the event, even if it has been healed, it becomes an event of memory. And even though it is not available to consciousness, suddenly it will impose itself again in forms of nightmares, repetitive actions of the survivor. Here I remember Freud, repressions and surfacing and resurfacing. This is a trauma, because the trauma is something mental, your memory. And I remember of Thirukkural, in flesh by fire inflamed, nature may thoroughly heal the soul. Or the physical wound will heal, but Thiruvallur says any wound has been caused by the tongue, the ulcer healeth nevermore. So now in trauma of surveillance, you have to really focus on the trauma of the mind. It actually creates a stigma. Someone is monitoring me, someone is watching me. That watching eye is really painful. It leads to memorialization. It actually gets ingrained in a memory and it manifests in different forms. And what remains is just fear. Now, let me take back all of you to Dickens's France. Dickens, in his Tale of Two Cities, he talks about the universal watchfulness. I see a metaphor of riding. When the traveler enters into the revolutionized France, Dickens talks about it's a sheer poetry. By riding after him and taking him back, riding before him and stopping him by anticipation, riding with him and keeping him in charge. Dickens has really written poetry inside prose. See, what is this riding? This riding has dual meaning. You can say ride is just simply you cover the distance. Ride means you override something and you ride the mind. That's what Dickens tries to convey this message here. Now let's move to, I just want to talk about the pandemic surveillance, because we are in the pandemic situation. I want everyone to really understand how this surveillance is being done. This is for our own benefit. See, disease surveillance are done by two ways. One is active and another one is passive. When the healthcare providers, the doctors, nurses, labs, or social workers, they give data to public officials, it is active surveillance. Passive surveillance is public officials search for disease information. These are the categories. And there are 4 types of surveillance types. One is risk factor surveillance, and sentinel surveillance, syndromic surveillance, and outbreak surveillance. This outbreak surveillance is what we are undergoing these days. Now, how they do this pandemic surveillance? Do we have any idea how they're doing the data surveillance? First one is, they say they get the reports from the healthcare providers. I want to really question that. There is a fallacy of true sampling, because not all the parts of the country is being have the same healthcare services. And certain areas, they don't have healthcare system at all. Then your sampling would be wrong. So I would call it as the fallacy of true sampling, and it will lead to hasty generalization. Then the second one is data accumulation. They say they classify and categorize data. This classification and categorization, it actually has the overlapping principles. And who gives the rules to classify? Whether you create the rules from the available data or you interpret some artificial rules into the data. That is second. The third one is data analysis. They say data crunching is happening. It is all rule-based software, artificial intelligence, blah, blah. But I would ask, what about the versions of the software? We know every 6 months we have a different version. That means when you move into 3.1, your 2.1 is obsolete, but you have taken decisions based on 2.1. Who is it at stake? The lives are at stake. The number 4 is judgment. It's precursor to action based on the data analysis, data accumulation, and reporting. They make a judgment and they take action. What action they take? It is constrained by financial sanctioning, legal stamping, and bureaucratic enforcing. See, this is what we have been undergoing through, even the surveillance, but we don't understand this in detail. Okay, the trauma of pandemic surveillance. What is actually happening now? Agamben has written in a newspaper in 2020. He says, men no longer believe in anything. Now, we have been put into that mode. We only believe we are bare biological existence. We have to safeguard our lives. I don't open my gate. I talk from 10 feet away. And I don't talk to my neighbor. I don't shake hands. It's all good. Yeah, positively, it is true and we have to follow that, but we don't believe in anything. He says a tyranny can only be founded on the fear of losing one's life. Everyone has become tyrannical. We doubt, we suspect, and everyone. And finally, he calls, I do not think that it will be possible to go back to living as before. Life has changed. The final laugh comes from Fuco. Fuco, in his Discipline and Punish, he says, the surveillance is permanent in its effects, even if it is discontinuous in its action. Even people say, yeah, the surveillance has been stopped and there is no data collected anymore, but the effects are permanent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful talk, bringing in reading man, reading pandemic, and talking about trauma, surveillance, memory, and all. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure all the participants were enriched with the knowledge that you have shared with them. Now it's time for questions. Let me now give the provision to unmute themselves. Yeah. Okay, now you might ask your questions. You can also post your questions in the chat box. We'll enable the chat also. I think there is Professor Muthuvel who has raised his hand. Muthuvel, sir, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Sir, how can the surveillance from the Fuco latest trend, today's trend? So, as a literature, we can understand the whole history from the Fuco. But what about the others people, sir? They can surveillance from the literature point of view, sir.
Sir, I couldn't get your question. Would you please repeat? It was not audible.
Sir?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Muthuvel, sir, kindly repeat your question.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Sir, as a English literature perspective, we can know the history of Foucault and we can surveil of this present conditions. But how we are English perspective of we can survey for the others? How can we explain for others? As a literature perspective of we can know from the Foucault, but this the same trend is repeated in the history.
Okay, I got your question. Yeah, in fact, explaining Foucault to all will not be viable, but we can take few concepts of Foucault, and there will be some novels. There are many novels which talk about the trauma of surveillance and these things. We have to identify that and apply that, and we can share. Okay, these are things you can see in those novels or any literary texts, and people can and students can do research also, because I would know that there are recent day novels. I couldn't bring those names. Three or four novels I've read talk about the I, and these things actually talk about how the individual has been chased to an extent that the freedom is being compromised and those things. But to take those novel and sort of apply these concepts, that will actually be beneficial.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Now
Thank you, sir.
let us,
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Now let us have another question from Digambar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I want to ask how our surveillance is related with the trauma in literature in present scenario.
Yeah, it's like, see, as I told you, trauma is now it has become a psychoanalytical category. Originally, it was a physical wound. The Greek term refers to a physical wound. Now it has become a socio-political, philosophical, and psychoanalytical term. As I told you, someone is going to monitor you and inspect you. That creates a stigma. The stigma of monitoring itself is the pain, and it creates anxiety in it. See, why people want to do surveillance? They want to control you. They want to monitor you. Even in Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, the guards want the prisoners to know they are monitored, but the guards don't want to do the monitoring. So the inmates, they actually behave properly, that they're being monitored. So this is actually the trauma of anxiety. So anxiety is the key element there. Now, when you say anxiety, the fear of monitoring is always there. The fear exists in the mind. Have I answered your question, sir?
Thank you, sir. I'm satisfied with your answer. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, Professor John Paul.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
I'm John Paul. I'm an assistant professor of English in Sri Krishnaditya College, Coimbatore.
Okay, thank you.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your wonderful presentation on this topic, sir.
Thank you.
And, I was also an alumni of St. John's College. I did my MA and MPhil.
Oh, good. Good to know that.
Yes, sir. I'm very happy to know. I mean, I'm very happy when I'm thinking that I also walked in the same classrooms like you, like literary genius, I once walked. I would like to have only one small opinion from you, sir.
Yeah.
We read literature that, and we come to know that a lot of pandemic have appeared in the past times. But whenever there is pandemic, people immediately start talking like this is all the punishment from God, and immediately we talk about second coming. What is your opinion, sir? Do we have to fear of all those things, and how to walk over from those kind of mental stress?
No, that is one way of looking at things, because even in the Greek times, I remember it was thought to be a pandemic. Even it was thought to be the handwork of Apollo. So in fact, they kept the rats in our temple of Apollo so that Apollo doesn't really kill them. So that sort of a belief was there. And if you believe in God, you believe, in fact, it is not that the God brought this pandemic on you, but the pandemic is always already here with you, right? Now looks like Corona is already here with us, staying with us. Now, if you have faith in God, it is better to rely on that belief. So instead of believing that God brought this, because God does not have any business to bring this. He should be busy with doing good things. God will not bring these things, but definitely, if you are a believer, it is better to believe in your faith and sort of pray to God to save you from this calamity.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we have Professor Keshav Bansal. Sir, your question?
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so I would like to propose a look at the concepts of trauma and surveillance from two perspectives. One from the perpetrator's perspective, and raise a word like voyeurism. I think that was conspicuously missing from your presentation, sir. And when you look at surveillance through the lens of voyeurism, there is a sense of pleasure that comes. I mean, the perpetrator or the sovereign deriving pleasure from the act of surveillance or voyeurism. The second thing I would like to raise is the concept of sadism or sadomas. When you look at trauma, there is a sense of pleasure for the sovereign, and there is a sense of trauma for the subject of that surveillance. And there comes a sense of macho sense of sadism. When you look at the subject is being traumatized, and yet there is a sense of pleasure that is derived from that pain. So these are, a bit complicated issues that I would like to raise. I myself do not understand them very well. If you could, somehow present your views or insights on these.
Yeah, Mr. Keshav, I intentionally avoided those topics in a very big public forum because those are not very nice to have topics, and the topic of today's discussion doesn't really warrant those here. I really focused on a socio-political dimension. Still, I would love to answer a question. This voyeurism, I can quote from the Bible. Maybe when David was looking at Bathsheba when she was taking bath, that was an instance of voyeurism. And even in our own mythologies, we have those type of voyeurism here and there. And this sadism mark is sad, right? That guy started that. And those things of voyeuristic and self-inflicting pleasures and these things, I don't want to really touch upon, and really avoided that intentionally, Keshav. Maybe we can have a separate topic that is something self and negative pleasure. We can take that as a separate topic.
There is one question in the chat box from Professor Mary Josephine. So the question is, would you like, she would like to know your take on the entire issue, pandemic, Fuco, Agamben, or even Dickens, the state of human life then and now. Do you think it is a bleak picture, hopeless, or do we learn to accept, live, and continue to survive under surveillance?
Yeah, I would say nothing has changed because the sovereign always acts as the sovereign. And the power relations and the power structures act as the same. That's what I told. It starts with the Roman father, Patriots, then it moves to a sovereign who can send his subjects to be killed. And then the same lives can be converted as bodies, can be exploited. Everything remains the same. I don't see a difference, but we often tend to forget because we often lose the associative sensibility. That's the weakness we have, and that is the strength the sovereign enjoys on and with. Have I answered, ma'am?
Yes, Dr. Selvan. Can you hear me?
Thank you, ma'am.
Professor Muthukumar, you have a question? Professor Muthukumar? No. Megha Santosh. Professor Megha Santosh?
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a simple question. Freedom is something that we all need, and surveillance exists from the time immemorial. Because without surveillance, it will be total anarchy and violence will be very high. So, surveillance, is it actually a trauma, or should we consider it as a kind of boon?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there is something called a self-surveillance. We ourselves do a surveillance for ourselves, right? So that is good. Surveillance to certain extent is good, and that extent, who is going to define? For example, I'll tell you, I'm just going to get the database of X number of population, and I can exploit that data to any extent. It is something like you have a knife, you can cut the vegetable and you can cut your neighbor as well. Surveillance is good in military parlance. That's where it started, right? When Moses sends his people to check how Canaan would look like or feel like, and he wants the experience of Canaan. That's what Moses asked his people to bring some fruits from Canaan. So that's a surveillance. That's a good surveillance, right? But the people of Canaan might think that surveillance is bad because someone else is going to come and invade and take their territory. It's maybe from which side you're operating at. But a mass population surveillance without any strict laws, without any debated laws. During the pandemic, lot of laws have been amended in an urgent situation without any debate in the parliament. That's what the question is. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Could you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. This is Rosalind Sophia. Thank you for this wonderful session, sir. Sir, the question is, in the Old Testament, God sent many prophets, and He also gave punishment with the pandemic. Do we call this pandemic as a discipline and a punish for according to Michel Foucault's discipline and punishment? Is it
Sure.
a pandemic? Okay, yes, sir.
If I take the Christian God, the Bible after the New Testament, that sort of thing will not happen because everything has been done away on the cross. That's what I told you. God does not have any business to send this pandemic. Maybe if you are a believer and if you have faith, you can pray to your God to save you from this calamity or a pandemic. But I personally feel God does not have any business to send pandemic, because if God is not happy with you, he can just strike you and kill you, right? Why should you play with these things? Those days are over. After the cross, these things are different. That's what I believe personally.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Is there a question from Professor Muthukumar? You have used the raise hand option. Do you have a question?
Hello. Kelvin.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, it was wonderful listening to you. And what I think I want to add something. It is not a question, but I think is that the idea of surveillance relates to the physical world, political world, physical world, governmental world. But there is another dimension of the human being also. What we are living is only tip of the iceberg. Most on the spiritual plane also, where we suffer on other side. So I think one more extension of this surveillance can be inner valence. Inner valence, when we are being, watched by somebody who is invisible, God maybe. We are always watched by whatever we are doing, whatever we are thinking. On the other side, politically, governments are doing the same job. That is surveillance. And I propose this word for further, debate or whatever you want when you go over with this further discussion. The idea is inner valence, that we are checked by some internal forces, supernatural or spiritual forces. So this is my view. If you wish, you can continue, add to this idea of your surveillance.
Thank you, sir. I know you are a poet and you are very creative and you create these things. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Any other questions? I think there is another one hand raised from Mr. Ajit Kumar. Sir, do you have a question, Ajit sir?
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sir, in the Athenian Democracy Forum, Professor Yuval Noah Harari of Hebrew University made a very subtle statement that when we look back at the pandemic 20 to 30 years from now, we remember it as a time when all democracies failed and surveillance model of dictators succeeded. What's your take on that?
See, democracy is a very relative term, Ajit, because if you, maybe I think I'll just take this etymological root of democracy. Demos is common man and crazy is rule. This is what people would immediately jump on to say. But if you really dissect the word, the suffix crazy, that rule is actually has multiple shades. It says rule, power, and strength. It's just not rule. See, the suffix crazy has three meanings: rule, power, and strength. Okay. This crazy comes from a Proto-Indo-European root that is called kar. That kar is hard. So democracy is not the solution, because even Plato has found fault with democracy. See, what is democracy? And I remember someone saying, it is not the majority always rules. The majority votes for it and someone else rules. So typically, if you see some 30, 40 years back, so far we have found democracy as one tool much better than kings, kingdoms, and other stuff. And as a socio-political animal, I would rather call man as a socio-political animal, we are evolving much beyond that. And I would recommend and suggest it is very good to read Zizek. Zizek talks about different alternative models. Zizek and Bourdieu and these people talk. And definitely these things are going to change and models are going to improve. And there will be, remember, there will be much more resistances from obsolete theories of democracies. It's always there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from one of the YouTube viewer, Madam Anju Nair.
Okay.
So Madam Anju Nair wants a clarification. Can surveillance help save mankind or prevent another pandemic?
Surveillance help man from another pandemic.
To save mankind or to prevent another pandemic.
Okay, this is what something called continuous and discontinuous. Okay, see what's going to happen is the surveillance. How long the surveillance is going to be there for the healthcare, and who is going to control the medical research? That's the question I asked. For example, see, we are sort of preempting. We always say we should be proactive in sort of predicting some economic models, commercial models, products, and these things. But why our scientists never predicted this sort of a coronavirus would happen? Do they lack imagination? No. Something else is triggering or guiding them to focus on their research. For example, the pharma companies, they focus on certain medical research which would give them profits. The profiteering, the capitalist profiteering, the crony capitalism, that is actually making the decision. So if you say surveillance of this pandemic, will it prevent another pandemic? No, but the lessons from this pandemic might prevent another pandemic or help us to manage another pandemic.
Thank you, sir. Hope there is one more hand raise from Ramya Ramakrishnan. Madam Ramya, yes.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
I have a question, sir. Is there any connection between trauma and creativity? Because in Pat Burger's regeneration, I have seen that this Wilfred Owen and Shazon started to write poems after triggered by the war trauma. So I'm just curious to know that whether there is any connection between the trauma and creativity.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It actually makes me to go to the basics. Any emotion can make you creative, not only trauma. Any good emotion, if you say trauma is a bad emotion, and if you say being happy is a good emotion, any emotion will lead you to being creative. See, trauma has a crisis. Trauma puts you into a crisis, and crisis most of the times leads you into creativity.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful way in which you have answered all the queries which were made by the participants. It was indeed a wonderful session, and we could also find the responses of the participants in the chat box that they have really enjoyed this session very much. So before we go into the formal vote of thanks, we would like to introduce our next upcoming webinar session. So on 17th of July, that is the next Saturday at 11 a.m., we have a wonderful session by Dr. Joseph Dureraj, Professor and Head of School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute, Gandhigram, on the topic Myth, Literature and Hermeneutics. And on 24th July, the time, there is a change in the usual time schedule. Okay, it's from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on presentism in Shakespeare's tragedies, Hamlet and King Lear. So it is by Professor G.M. Joseph Dunstan, former Vice Chancellor of St. Joseph University, Nagaland. And our videos, the recorded videos of our webinars can be watched by the participants in our YouTube channel, IQAC NMCC. You just need to type IQAC NMCC and you can watch the recorded videos. So now, once again, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Selvin Vedamanikyam, Professor of English of St. Joseph University of Nagaland, for the wonderful way in which he had elaborated on the topic assigned to him, and with the very powerful slides. It was really very attractive, and the way in which you handled giving explanation. It was splendid. It was wonderful. So thank you so much on behalf of the management, principal, the organizing committee of our college. I thank Professor Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Now let me welcome the webinar co-convener, the student from first MA, Ms. Prajisha PS, to propose the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to all. I feel the need to thank Almighty God for having given us this opportunity to conduct this webinar. I would like to thank Advocate L. Rajadurai, correspondent of Nesamani Memorial Christian College, who had been offering his support and best wishes. Thank you, sir. Next, I thank Dr. K. Palraj, principal of our college, who had always been supportive to the initiatives of the faculty and students. Thank you, sir. I feel honored to thank our resource person, Dr. Selvin Vedamanikam, Professor of English, St. Joseph University, Nagaland. Sir, your session was intelligent and explanatory. It was a mix of history, psychology, and literature. You have given us reference and examples from English and Indian literature. On behalf of all the participants present here, thank you, sir. I wish to thank Professor T.P. Thomas R.S., Head of the Department of English and Internal Quality Assurance Cell Coordinator, who had been enthusiastically organizing webinars with the aim of sharing knowledge. Thank you, sir, for your initiatives. Next, I thank Ms. Shirley J., who is the webinar convener and who welcomed the gathering. Thank you, Ms. Shirley. I thank the IQAC and PG English Association of Nesamani Memorial Christian College for organizing this webinar. I thank the organizers and supporters who helped in organizing this webinar. Most of all, I thank all the participants of this webinar, seeking to acquire, share, and extend their knowledge. Thank you all, and hope this webinar would be fruitful to you all. Thank you all once more on behalf of Internal Quality Assurance Cell and PG English Association of Nesamani Memorial Christian College, Marthandam.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prajisha, for the vote of thanks. So once again, I thank Dr. Vedamanikam, Selvin Vedamanikam. I would also thank Dr. Dunstan, Dr. Noel Irderaj, all the participants who have gathered here, all those participants who have asked the questions in this during this session. You have made this program highly interactive, and it was a very fruitful experience for all of us. So thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir, and thanks to all the participants.
Thank you, sir. So the feedback link is posted in the chat box.
You also have
So thank you very much for your patience and for making the program a successful one. So thank you one and all.